How's it hanging? My name is Sean, and if you are familiar with Andrew Yang at all, then you will know that he is running for president in 2020, and is off with a bang, presumably out of nowhere. And if you know that, then you must surely know that his flagship proposal is a form of UBI that he calls the Freedom Dividend, which will provide every American above the age of 18 with $1,000 each per month. And if you didn't know that, well, you do know now. So, love him or hate him, you know that he will bring math, and more importantly, he truly believes in what he stands for. It's so obvious to most Americans. They understand why his proposal is so popular. But to the establishment's surprise, he has gained traction everywhere. The highest poll has him at almost 4% as of the making of this video, and we will still have a long time to go before 2020. And yes, everywhere that Andrew goes now, he gets the same question over and over and over again. He answers and they ask again.
One of the most common questions I hear asked after you describe it is how the heck you're going to pay for it.
But how are you going to pay for that?
How are you going to pay for this?
First of all, how much would it cost?
Yeah, Andrew, how are you going to pay for it? Now, even though he answers the question on every show and in every interview, it is still a very valid question. Now, you would think that the question is asked of him because it's the boldest idea on any platform right now, and that's fine with Yang supporters because that's new people who get to be exposed to his ideas, right? But you would think that these interviewers would actually have a worthwhile question to push back at or to get into the meat of Yang's UBI, but usually they don't, mostly due to the nature of 24-hour, news cycles, media. It's just the way it is. Everything is done in 30-second sound bites, and you really can't get to the core of anything. Well, today we're going to do just that. We are diving into the core of Andrew Yang's Freedom Dividend and unpacking this whole thing, assuming, of course, the proposed bill would be enacted into law as is. So after this video, we should know three things. Number one, how much the Freedom Dividend would cost-ish. Number two, how the Freedom Dividend would or could be funded. Number three, what impact the Freedom Dividend would have on the citizens and the economy, both local and as a whole. So if you have Yang support, but have had trouble grasping or fully understanding all of what Yang's version of UBI actually is or does, full disclosure, for those of you who may not know, I am a supporter of Yang and I am biased in that regard, but the numbers don't lie. So if you aren't a supporter of Yang, maybe you will, take something educational from this. I am also not an economist, a mathematician, or a professional numbers guy of any kind. We are analyzing from a layman's perspective, so keep that in mind going forward. And alright, so here goes. So to get the full picture, we will break this down into coherent parts, starting at the very beginning. What is the actual definition of UBI? Universal Basic Income, or UBI, is a model for providing all citizens of a country or other geographic areas within a given sum of money, regardless of their income, resources, or employment status. The purpose of the UBI is to prevent or reduce poverty and increase equality among citizens, according to the advocacy group Basic Income Earth Network. The essential principle behind basic income is the idea that all citizens are entitled to a livable income, whether or not they contribute to production and despite the particular circumstances in which they are born. So, seems pretty basic, right? Okay, good. Now, just know that many people will have a different take on this. As a result, there is a spectrum, as there is with most political governing models. So, you have on one end the full extreme socialist version of the spectrum where the government controls all sources of national income and ensures a myriad of benefits to its citizens, in effect making every expenditure of the populace covered under a large umbrella of UBI. And then on the complete opposite side, you have Andrew Yang's Freedom Dividend, or as he likes to call it, capitalism, where income doesn't start at zero. Neither are without their faults. But what does make Andrew Yang's version of UBI different from the rest of the spectrum? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, Andrew Yang isn't proposing that the government fund the livelihoods of the populace unconditionally and control all sources of income and redistribute that income according to how the government sees fit, which could include, but not limited to, controlling healthcare, wages, food, housing, and so on. Many conservatives will point to this end of the far left spectrum of UBI to show how socialism inherently fails. A number of examples come to mind, and yes, many times the far left versions will fail. They admittedly bite off more than they can chew. But make no mistake, there are as many success stories as there are failed ones. If you sprinkle the right amount of capitalism in it, or in Yang's case, he's sprinkling just a tad bit of socialism in it, and an already established capitalist society would thrive. So what then exactly changes under Yang's plan if the government still operates as normal? Well, you see, under our current system, we have huge corporate monopolies at the top who combined profits untold trillions each year providing various goods and services. Then you have us, the people, who buy their goods and services and provide the labor and means of production. Then in an ideal world, you'll have the government who acts as a middleman and steps in and says, you, the people, give the government X amount of money, and the same goes for the corporations. So both the corporations and the people are to be taxed in return for militaristic safety, infrastructure upkeep, development, first responders, and so on. Except that's not what happens, right? The corporations use their untold trillions to lobby the government to take part in closed room deals, and in nearly every case pay zero taxes or a fraction of what they would pay. The common civilian is taxed at a rate of 30 to 35%. To make matters worse, robotics are taking over jobs. This is just a fact. All the self-checkout lines at your local trillion-dollar Walmart, that now X number of cashiers are just out of work and forever replaced for those few, self-checkout lines. They are convenient, but, they do come with a price. This system is corrupt beyond belief, with billions being drained away from local communities and not a dime being given back directly, let alone in tax revenue. All that money flows to the top, and that's where it stays. If Yang's freedom dividend was in place, then it would effectively put the people on a level playing field with the government as a middleman. The people get a seat at the table and they get dealt in. They get a cut. It's the people stepping in and saying, okay, government, you can do your normal thing, and instead of the corporations dealing with the government to find a way to get their taxes down to zero plus a tax break to boot, we step in as the people and take our cut directly. There's no bureaucracy involved. There is no other way to force the revenue back into local economies in a direct manner. It doesn't stop the flow of money from the bottom to the top, but it at least forces a certain percentage of the money back into local economies, those of which would never see a dime of that back. Whereas 50 years ago, a huge corporation would have taken those gains, opened up a new factory, and hired hundreds of people, meaning that the cash flows back into that community directly. This just isn't the case anymore. If Amazon opened up new stores in every single city, there would be way more machines than people in them. The money goes in and doesn't come out. That's what Yang's plan would prevent. So how much would this cost? According to the 2017 Data Center Census, there was roughly 250 million adults over the age of 18, out of which 71 million people are already on one or more government-run programs such as Social Security, food stamps, etc. Now, Yang's plan doesn't cover those people unless they forgo their benefits and opt in. If less than half gave up their benefits they had already had for Yang's dividend, then the government would have extra money because the largest majority of the funding for the dividend wouldn't come from previous government expenditures. But let's assume for the sake of argument and make it hard on ourselves, let's push the cost to the max and say all 71 million people opt in to keep their own government benefits, and this huge government spending pie stays intact and we can't pull from it unless we absolutely have to. So we are at about $1.8 trillion if we was to give every single adult over the age of 18 $1,000 tomorrow. Yang's own estimates are about 1.3 trillion, but I don't know what he knows and I'm not as smart as him, so we'll just keep it basic. If you give $1,000 to 250 million people, that's the number you get. Now keep in mind that big $2 trillion government budget pie is funded primarily by us, the people. So part of Yang's proposal is a value-added tax, a very low one compared to, like, say, the EU. This value-added tax will be our bargaining chip. It's a 10% sales tax. So let's say you have a dollar candy bar and the value-added tax raises it to $1.10, an extra 10 cents. Sucks, but no big deal. Companies do that kind of stuff all the time. They raise prices a lot of times at much larger margins to the point where people have to go to discount stores just to get a decent price on stuff. So 10% is really not that big of a deal, especially when you consider the benefit it's going to give us. That 10% is our stake. We are then shareholders in this corporate profit, and thus we get our dividend. Plus, the corporation has to pay in their fair share of taxes, a portion of which will make up the difference needed from the value-added tax. And again, keep in mind, we're not touching the money that is already in the government. But to get an idea of what this value-added tax could do for us shareholders, let me put it into perspective for you. Illinois is by all means a typical average state as far as sales tax revenue goes. Each state varies, but let's take this one average. Illinois boasts about a 7% sales tax rate, and the state's general operating revenues for the fiscal year of 2018 were about $37.7 billion, according to recent reports by the General Assembly's Commission of Government Forecasting and Accountability. If you apply that average to each state across the board in all 50 states, you come up with a figure of, guess what? $1.8 trillion. That is just for one fiscal year. And that's at a 7% value-added tax, not 10% as Yang is suggesting. That would put us closer to $3 trillion if you was to cut out the government bureaucracy. So month by month, you're already raking in billions. Now, admittedly, we only cover less than a fourth of the year if everyone is to get $1,000 a month. So we still have a little bit of work to go. Now, Yang's plan could change after implemented, but let's imagine for a second that corporations pay the same share of taxes as we do, and they don't get around it. Whatever Yang does to ensure their fair share is brought to the table is largely unknown. He talks about a slice of every Amazon transaction and robot truck mile, but let's just say it's the same 30-35% we all have to pay. All of these huge tech companies have to pay their slice. All of these giant companies made anywhere from $90 billion to almost $1 trillion per year. This is just a 2018, just a glance. Over 258 of these Fortune 500 companies paid less than 5% or zero, while also curating reports that showed lower profit margins than what they really earned due to tax write-offs, meaning less taxes paid, and in turn they got more money for nothing. But they want to turn around and tell you that you can't get $1,000 for nothing, right? When it's not for nothing, it's your dividend because you're a shareholder in this great nation. You don't even have to do the math to know that 1 year of corporations not paying their full share of taxes pushes us far beyond the threshold needed for the majority of that year for every American to have $1,000. If you count every single corporation who's a billion-dollar corporation, corporations who do dealings in America that might not even be American-based, there's still a certain sort of taxes they have to pay, tariffs and stuff. If you add all that stuff up, we will have untold amounts of money, and we're not even into the government budget yet, right? So, and even if you started getting into the government budget, you quickly learn that the military eats up over half to fight some black-clothed, marauding knife wielders. Take that for what it's worth. I'll let that lie as is. So in conclusion, yes, it is doable without making government bigger or taking funding away from other programs. It's not that we don't have the money, it's what we are willing to spend it on, and are the mega billionaires going to play fair? And to round it all up, let's see the impact it would have on local communities. Many will go out and spend their dividend on car repairs, nights out, stock up the fridge, pay off, or down some debt. The economy would boom virtually overnight. People could afford a day off and they can go on a vacation. They can afford their own health care if they wanted to pay their own money out of pocket because they have it now. And nobody can't say that that's not their money because that's money that would have been in that community if all these huge tech companies wasn't siphoning it out and never putting a dime back in. With the freedom dividend, 80% of Americans won't have to worry about making which bill will have a late fee, having to worry about which bill to pay first. No people will stop working. If I gave you $1,000 right now, you couldn't live off that, and you would have to work to even afford your utilities. And yes, this would even create jobs. Think about the certain amount of Americans who live comfortably, but maybe don't have multiple thousands in the bank, right? That family still lives fair and happy, but now they have an extra $1,000. Now dad can go put a lease on a building and get that small business of his started. The one he's always been dreaming about that he doesn't stop talking about. You know that one, right? Look at how many small amateur photographers or aspiring bakers could quit managing, the bakery that they're at now for a huge corporation and start a business of their own just within a matter of months. And just following that train of thought, you can easily see how so many small businesses can be created, breathing life back into your main street and forcing a whole new chain of revenue in your local communities. So yes, it's possible, and yes, there are flaws, but when isn't there? And at least this rights some of the wrongs, which is more than any of the other candidates are proposing. So thanks for watching. I hope you guys learned something. This took me a while to research, so if you enjoyed, please consider dropping a like and subscribing for more political news and breakdowns. And also, if you think I am wrong anywhere or think I've missed something or just want some further clarification, I look forward to hearing you in the comment section below. And don't worry, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one, and have a good day.
And what I'm telling people is, look, we have the money. Like, our economy is up to $20 trillion, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years alone. We're the richest, most advanced economy in the history of the world. We can easily afford $1,000 a month.
Where everything thrown at him, serving the truth. Gang butts trickle up. Hey, gang standing up. Hey, plain Jane's on a bus. Man, John Doe know it's us. Hey, gang bucks trickle up. Hey, gang standing up. Hey, plain Jane's on a bus. Man, John Doe know it's us.